Well, more bad news for President Biden as he bolts to Camp David for the holiday weekend. It is not just the rocky debt ceiling talks or a growing Republican primary field that he's got to worry about. It's his own party and the American people. A new Fox News poll shows that the president is facing serious competition from Democrats. He only captures 62% of the vote against challengers Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Marianne Williamson. And worse, 67% of Americans view a Biden victory in 2024 as a, quote, disaster or setback for America. The media pointing out that President Biden does face an uphill battle.
Horrible news, horrible for Joe Biden in our new CNN poll. While the president leads his Democratic competitors by a huge margin, two-thirds of all of the American people surveyed, 66% of the public, say that a Biden victory would either be a setback or a disaster for the United States.
It's not an outlier, right? So our CNN poll had Kennedy at 20%. We've had two Fox polls out in the last month. One had him at 16%. The other one had him at 19%. Kennedy is putting up a far more impressive showing than I would have thought when he first entered the race.
And with numbers that bad, critics say the president isn't doing himself any favors by avoiding the media. It's been more than a month since the president announced that he was going to run for re-election, and he's still yet to travel out to hold a campaign event. He's been very stingy with press conferences, too, but the White House insists the president's out there.
I feel strongly by saying this. The president is certainly not media shy. He would disagree with that characterization of him.
We might not. Okay, while the president stays away, Republicans are going on offense and attacking his presidency.
We have a president who is a listless vessel, not energetic, and not dealing with the key challenges that are facing our country. But it does not have to be this way. Our decline as a country is not inevitable. It is a choice, and I think we can choose a better pathway.
Under President Biden, our nation is retreating away from patriotism and faith. The radical left is pushing us into a culture of grievance instead of a culture of greatness.
Okay, a lot to discuss there, but Rachel, let's start with this. The White House saying he's available to the media and he would take issue with any of us calling him press shy.
Well, it's obvious he's not out there. I mean, and who would? I mean, the stuff you were reading said, well, he's out there, but, you know, it's good for him. Listen, he is not ready for prime time right now. He's made too many mistakes. It's better to keep him out. It's worked before.
It did. I mean, it worked in 2020, but Jessica, we're over COVID now. He's going to have to get out there, and he's doing that with really negative numbers from his own party. I mean, to be the sitting president and have like 40% of your party looking to somebody else is not a good start.
No, it's not. And I definitely thought that this would whittle away. It may still. I mean, we're pretty far out from general election time and from when the debates would technically start, even though they're not going to be happening.
Wait, do you think that they should have those?
The DNC debates?
Well, because listen, I know it's out there,
question.
but there have been a number of Democrats who stepped forward to say like, I think we should do it.
So I always think that it's best to be out as much as possible. I've said that about President Biden. I think he does really well in interviews, honestly, and I think that he shows, you know, his breadth and depth of understanding of the job and what he did as a senator, and can talk about vice president and all of it.
So why not do more?
Well, I think he should do more. I think he should have more press conferences. But to the point about the debates, this would be completely controverting tradition in terms of having them. The RNC did exactly the same thing with Donald Trump. They actually declared even earlier than the DNC did in terms of blocking debates for President Biden. Ronna McDaniel came out and said, we're supporting Donald Trump. There were other candidates in the field, like a Mark Sanford, a Bill Weld. They didn't get their chance to do it, and some states didn't even hold primaries. They just walked Donald Trump to the finish line there. So it's a bit hypocritical when people throw that at the Democrats, but obviously these numbers aren't fantastic, and something has shifted. And I think a good amount of it is actually around what's going on with the debt ceiling fight, because I was looking back at the polling for President Obama when he had the same fight. And when the American public was asked, who will you blame if we default, it was Republicans by a +10 margin. Now, if we default, and I saw Janet Yellen just push the deadline back to June 5th, so hopefully we'll get something done. But it's President Biden +3 or 4 points that he would be the one who got blamed.
Responsible.
So something is shifting in the American psyche in terms of who they're holding responsible for it and the perception that they have of Republicans. They obviously think to some degree that McCarthy is the one that is out there doing more negotiating or
Listen, he had a really hard start getting to be speaker. I mean, 15 ballots, nobody wants to go through that, but he's gotten a border bill passed, he's gotten a debt ceiling passed, a bill that, now that they're negotiating over this thing. But Joy, a lot of people didn't think he would be able to hold the Republicans together even to do that. But on the other side, let's stay with the president, because 2/3 of the country saying it would be a disaster or setback for their current president to be reelected. That's got to be troubling for the White House.
Yeah, I don't ever remember President Trump polling under 90% with the Republicans going into 2020, even with COVID and all the other things that were attempted to hang around his neck. When you look at Biden, it's not about being a character indictment. I don't think it's the Hunter Biden story that's pulling Biden back. I think people are concerned. They're concerned he wouldn't make it through a second term. They're concerned he's not with it right now. And that's not, I'm not attacking him for his age. I'm saying these are real conversations that people have. So even if you're a moderate or on the left, if you're going to challenge Biden, you got to run to the left, but can you really run to the left of a guy who says, what are the progressives saying? Yeah, we're for that. That's what we'll do. Then you run more moderate than him, like RFK's doing. Or Junior, and what he's doing is he's holding that populist space that Trump held for the Republicans.
Right.
I don't know if that's a winning strategy, but it's enough to get, I mean, when Trump first came on the scene, he was at 30%, which is not a majority. It's just a majority compared to 10 other people dividing up what's left. So maybe RFK has some traction, maybe he doesn't. But it doesn't look like the Democrats are going to let anyone challenge Biden in any meaningful way outside of someone who comes in as a complete outlier.
Which is why RFK says that the style of the DNC is like the Chinese style, the communist style.
Tulsi Gabbard said the same thing.
Tulsi Gabbard, who isn't a Democrat anymore, and I
wouldn't
firmly
be either if
believe
they treated me that way. I mean, I think I'd walk away as well.
I believe that RFK is occupying a space in the Democratic Party where it's the alternative to Biden, but not about his platform. You guys know more about what RFK is talking about than Democrats do.
But
right?
the question is, it's not whether Democrats won't, the RFK Junior voters won't go to Biden if they have a choice. It's whether they stay home.
Going to.
They're not going to like cross over.
83%.
Tyrus, how do we solve all the world's problems?
How do we solve all the world's problems? Well, we take them one at a time and we actually deal with them. The bad news is President Biden. It has nothing to do with the Democratic Party. We saw at the G7 the state he's in. That speech was painful to watch, and it had nothing to do with politics. We see a deteriorating old man, period. Who's running for Democrat right now is irrelevant. They're not going to, Kennedy's never going to get there. Gavin Newsom will probably, when the time is right, and the time is not right now. Gavin Newsom, he's starting to do things. He's starting to take positions that are more in the national than the California way. But the bottom line is, and the thing with 97 days, McCarthy wants to negotiate with the president. It's not going to happen. You can't negotiate without. We see the state of his speeches. Everything he does is controlled. When he gets into situations, when he's asked questions, that's when we see the deterioration. He's not going to run again. He can't. But here's the deal.
Wait, you're saying he's not going to run this campaign?
I think eventually he's not going to, but here's the thing.
Joe Biden?
Even Biden,
I agree with you.
A deteriorated Joe Biden would still get votes because as long as it's Trump, because it'll be, I will vote for a deteriorated Biden before I will vote for Trump. Yeah, so as long as Trump's in it, Biden's in it. If for something happens and Trump goes out, look for a big change, and that's where you see Newsom. But who else is running for this?
Here. Yeah. What do you think, Rachel?
Well, I've been saying for a long time, I think that Biden's not going to make it to the end, and that Michelle Obama will be brought in. After all, the Obamas are pretty much running this administration.
Okay, so we got to think if it's going to be an Obama Newsom or Newsom Obama.
I think Newsom, if I was a betting man,
Michelle Obama is not running for anything. The woman says every single time.
Newsom is making moves.
Okay, all right. You've heard the predictions here.
You saw him take a tour of the house. He checked out the curtains.
He did actually. Measuring the curtains. That's what happened.
They matched the drapes.
Biden went to Europe.
He was looking fine walking outside of that White House.
If I leave home on the road and some man goes to my house while I'm gone and he's checking out the house and starts talking to my kids about his moral compass, that man's making a move.
Oh, boy. You heard it here. Okay.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.